The stage lights glared across a velvet curtain as the cameras panned slowly over the audience. It wasn't a political rally this time, nor was it a traditional Hollywood red carpet gala. This was something stranger, a televised town hall of culture and politics that had paired unlikely figures together for a live discussion. On one side of the stage sat Denzel Washington, not in a movie role but in real life, invited as the voice of cultural authority, admired for his gravitas and reputation as one of America's most respected actors. On the other side sat Karoline Leavitt, crisp, unflinching, the political figure who had lately been building a reputation as someone who didn't flinch in front of hostile media or establishment figures. The producers wanted sparks, and they were about to get exactly that. The moderator barely got through his introduction before Denzel leaned forward in his chair, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the entire auditorium. "Karoline," he said, "you come here trying to present yourself as something bigger than what you are. But at the end of the day, aren't you just another politician? That's all I see. Just another face in a long line of people promising change and delivering nothing." The audience reacted instantly, some clapping, some gasping, some laughing nervously. It was the kind of jab meant to disarm, to define her before she could define herself. Karoline didn't move at first. She let the silence breathe, eyes fixed on him like she was memorizing every word. Her hand rested lightly on the table in front of her, but her body language was a wall, upright, still, completely unshaken. A few seconds passed, and the moderator leaned in, clearly expecting her to stammer, to defuse, maybe even to dodge. But Karoline had built her career on the exact opposite, meeting challenges head-on, no matter who threw them. "Just a politician," she repeated slowly, almost like she was tasting the words. The camera zoomed in on her face, and the audience leaned in too. Her voice, when it came, was firm, deliberate. "Denzel, with all due respect, I don't play characters. I don't read lines written for me. I stand here as myself. And I fight for real people, people who don't get applause, who don't get their names on screens, who don't get the luxury of pretending their words don't matter. So if you want to call that just a politician, fine. But I'll tell you this, I'd rather be a politician fighting for truth than an actor playing it safe from the sidelines." The crowd erupted, some stood to clap, some booed, others shouted in shock. The tension in the room had gone from simmer to boil in a heartbeat. Denzel's eyebrow arched as he leaned back, clearly surprised she had come at him so directly, so early, without hesitation. The moderator raised a hand, trying desperately to control the moment, but it was too late. The tone of the entire night had been set. Karoline wasn't here to play defense. She was here to turn every attack into a weapon, and Denzel had just given her the first one. The tension didn't ease, it sharpened. The moderator's forced smile only underscored the electricity flooding the room. Denzel crossed his arms and leaned back, a man who had made a career of commanding stages and cameras suddenly realizing he wasn't the only one in the spotlight anymore. His laugh was quiet but cutting. "See," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed audience, "that's what I mean. You're polished. You're rehearsed. Everything out of your mouth sounds like you've been practicing in the mirror for weeks. And that's the problem with politicians, Karoline. You're performers. No different from me, except at least I admit it. You all hide behind the word truth, but it's just another script." The audience cheered again, some for him, some just caught in the rhythm of the moment. The moderator, sensing a viral clip forming, leaned back and let it ride. The camera zoomed tighter, catching Karoline's steady eyes fixed on Denzel. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. Instead, she leaned forward now, her palms flat against the table, claiming the space in front of her as if it were a battlefield she had no intention of retreating from. "You call me rehearsed," she fired back, her voice suddenly louder, crisp with defiance. "Denzel, I don't have the privilege of multiple takes. I don't get to cut a scene if it goes wrong. I don't get a makeup artist before I go into battle. When I walk into Congress, when I walk into a town hall with working families, when I walk into hostile interviews, it's one take, live, no safety net. That's not a performance. That's real. And unlike Hollywood, in politics the stakes aren't box office numbers. They're lives, families, futures. Her words hit like thunderclaps, each one growing in force. The audience went restless, some shouting, yes, while others booed, but all of them glued to the exchange. Karoline continued, her voice never breaking. You say I sound polished. Maybe that's because I've had to fight harder than most just to be heard. Maybe it's because the media, the establishment, and yes, even cultural icons like yourself, have told people like me to sit down, shut up, and stay in the shadows. But here's the truth, I don't stay in the shadows. And I don't play pretend. I don't have a script, I have a mission. And if you want to mock that, then go ahead. But don't confuse preparation with performance. One saves reputations. The other saves lives. The crowd roared, and this time it wasn't one-sided. Even some who had clapped for Denzel now found themselves applauding her conviction. The moderator raised his eyebrows, sensing the momentum shift. Denzel's jaw flexed. He had expected an easy jab, a witty dismissal, a young politician folding under the pressure of a seasoned cultural icon. Instead, he had just been dragged into a fight. One where every word he spoke could be turned back on him. Karoline's stare didn't waver. She wasn't there to win Hollywood applause. She was there to win the room, and right now, she was doing exactly that. The silence after Karoline's rebuttal didn't last long. Denzel, never one to shrink in the spotlight, leaned forward with his elbows on the table, his voice dropping into that cinematic bass tone that had commanded movie theaters for decades. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was sharpening. Let me tell you something, Karoline, he said, pointing a finger across the table. You talk about stakes like you're the only one who's carried weight. I've seen more of the world than most politicians ever will. I've sat with soldiers who've been broken by war, I've walked through neighborhoods left behind by the very leaders you defend, and I've stared down corruption in ways you can't even imagine. Don't stand there and tell me you're the only one who knows what real means. You don't have a monopoly on truth. The crowd erupted with cheers again, eager for the comeback. The moderator leaned in, practically glowing at the clash of titans unfolding before him. Denzel didn't stop. His voice grew hotter, more personal. You claim you're not rehearsed, but I watch you and I see every line stitched together for maximum applause. You're not raw, you're calculated. And people are tired of politicians dressing up as revolutionaries. You may fool some of them, but you don't fool me. That was his strike, personal, precise, aimed to make her look small. But Karoline didn't flinch. She let the audience cheer. She let his words echo. Then, when the room grew still again, she spoke, not fast, not fiery this time, but deliberate, steady, cutting. Denzel, she began, her eyes locked on his, you've seen the world. You've seen pain, corruption, and injustice. But here's the difference, when the cameras shut off, you get to go home. When the credits roll, you get applause. I don't. My fight doesn't end when the lights dim, it begins there. Because the people I represent don't get to walk away from broken neighborhoods or failed policies. They live it, every day. And they don't need another voice telling them what's wrong. They need someone to change it. Her words rang with such conviction that parts of the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some even clapped through Denzel's scowl. She leaned closer, her voice cutting sharper now. You call me calculated? Maybe I am. Maybe I think about every word, every sentence, because I know one slip can be used to bury me. That's not performance, that's survival. And if you think survival is fake, then maybe you've forgotten the difference between acting and living. I don't perform for applause. I fight for results. And you're right about one thing, people are tired. But they're not tired of voices like mine. They're tired of elites, in Hollywood, in Washington, in the media, telling them their struggles are just another storyline. The room exploded again, louder, deeper this time. This wasn't just applause, it was thunder, fueled by the recognition of truth cutting through performance. Even those who had leaned toward Denzel now couldn't deny the raw force of her words. The moderator looked back and forth like a referee watching two fighters go blow for blow. Denzel pressed his lips tight, knowing he couldn't let her land the last punch. The fight had only escalated, and it was far from over. Denzel wasn't finished. He straightened in his chair, jaw tight, leaning into the moment like a prizefighter coming back for the next round. The crowd could sense it. He was about to go from philosophy to politics, from theory to specifics, where he believed Karoline might stumble. "All right," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "let's move past the speeches. Let's talk about what you actually stand for. You say you fight for the people, but what are you fighting with? What's your plan for healthcare? For jobs? For families living paycheck to paycheck? Because speeches don't fill prescriptions, and applause doesn't pay bills. So tell us, what makes you any different from the politicians who've been promising change for decades?" The question landed like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. The audience grew tense. Even the moderator leaned back, eager to watch. Denzel was cornering her on policy, the territory where most candidates get tangled up in jargon, numbers, and talking points that drain the fire out of their words. But Karoline didn't blink. She leaned forward, her hands pressed together, as if daring him to listen carefully. "You want specifics? Fine. Let's talk specifics. Healthcare? I believe in choice, real choice. Not bureaucrats deciding what doctor you see, not insurance companies dictating what treatments you're allowed. I fight for reforms that put the patient back in charge, that let families decide with their doctors, not Washington." She paused just long enough to let it sink in before moving on. "Jobs? How about we stop strangling small businesses with regulations written by people who've never signed a paycheck in their lives? How about unleashing American energy instead of importing weakness from abroad? Families don't need slogans, they need opportunities, to build, to grow, to succeed without the government standing over their shoulder." The audience clapped, some rising to their feet. Denzel narrowed his eyes, but she wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her voice lower, sharper. "And let's get really clear, Denzel, applause doesn't pay bills, you're right. But you know what else doesn't? Actors, elites, and politicians standing on stages telling Americans they're victims without ever lifting a finger to fix the system. I'm not here to write a script, I'm here to write laws. And the difference between me and the politicians you're talking about is simple. I don't want to control people's lives, I want to free them to live." The room shook with noise, applause, shouts, even whistles. The moderator raised his hand to calm the crowd, but it was no use. Karoline's words had cut through the fog of policy and turned it back into something visceral, something human. Denzel sat back, his expression unreadable now. For the first time, he didn't fire back immediately. He took a sip of water, glanced at the crowd, then back at her. The audience knew what it meant, she had landed a blow he hadn't expected. The debate had turned. What began as Denzel's trap had become Karoline's stage. Denzel adjusted his tie, leaned forward, and this time his words weren't aimed at policy at all. His voice carried the weight of a seasoned actor delivering a final scene, sharp and cutting. "Karoline, speeches sound nice, but let's be real. You're young. You don't have decades of experience in politics, in business, in diplomacy. You've never carried the burden of leading millions or facing global crises. People out there are asking themselves, why should they trust you? Why should America put its future in the hands of someone who, to many, still looks like she's auditioning for a role she's not ready to play?" The crowd gasped, a ripple of tension spreading through the studio. It wasn't just a challenge, it was personal. Denzel had gone for her credibility, her very right to sit at the table. The audience leaned in, waiting to see if she would flinch. But Karoline didn't hesitate. She rose slightly in her seat, eyes burning, posture unshakable. She let the silence hang for a beat, then spoke with deliberate calm. Denzel, you're right about one thing, I don't have decades in Washington. I don't have a career built on red carpets or cozy dinners with elites. And thank God for that. Because those decades you're talking about? They're the decades that failed the American people. The audience roared. She continued, her voice gathering strength. You say I'm young, yes, I am. But I see that as strength, not weakness. I'm not weighed down by decades of broken promises. I'm not stuck defending mistakes made 20 years ago. I'm part of the generation that has to live with the debt, the chaos, the corruption that politicians left behind. And unlike them, I'm willing to fight to change it. The crowd erupted into applause, but Karoline leaned even harder into the moment, her voice rising above the noise. You call it inexperience. I call it independence. I don't owe anyone in Washington. I don't owe the lobbyists, the insiders, the donors who buy silence. My loyalty is to the people sitting in this audience and to the millions watching at home, not to the power brokers who've been running this country into the ground. The studio shook. Even the moderator raised an eyebrow at how the tide had shifted. Karoline had turned Denzel's attack into her weapon, flipping the narrative completely. Denzel, to his credit, didn't back down. He nodded slowly, lips pursed, as if acknowledging that she had landed a blow he hadn't anticipated. The crowd's energy surged toward Karoline, and for the first time, it felt like Denzel was the one on the defensive. The debate was no longer about policy or personality, it had become a battle over vision and truth. And Karoline had just claimed the upper hand. Denzel leaned forward again, his tone dropping lower, sharper, the kind of delivery that made audiences lean in, waiting for the strike. Karoline, he said, politics isn't just about bills and votes. It's about morality, it's about leadership. And I have to ask you, what values do you truly stand for? Because to a lot of people, your message sounds like anger. Like division. And history shows that anger, when it drives politics, tears nations apart. So tell me, are you leading people toward unity, or are you just fueling the flames for your own spotlight? The audience hummed with energy, some clapping in agreement, others booing softly. It was the actor's classic move, reframe her fight as selfish ambition, cast her passion as destructive. If she stumbled now, the headlines would crown him the victor. But Karoline didn't stumble. She leaned in, locking eyes with Denzel, her voice steady but rising with each word. You want to talk about morality, Denzel? Let's do it. Morality isn't reading speeches about unity while entire communities collapse under broken promises. Morality isn't smiling on camera while families can't afford groceries, or veterans sleep on the streets. Morality isn't politicians protecting their own power while the American people carry the cost. The crowd erupted, some standing, clapping, shouting encouragement. Karoline held up her hand, quieting them, her voice sharp and deliberate now. You say I sound angry. You're damn right I'm angry. And every American struggling to pay rent, every parent working 2 jobs, every young person drowning in debt, they're angry too. But here's the difference, I'm not afraid to say it out loud. I'm not afraid to fight with it. Because that anger isn't hate, it's love, love for a country worth fighting for, love for a people who deserve better than the lies they've been fed for decades. The studio lit up with applause, louder than before. The moderator tried to cut in, but the energy was too strong, the audience wanted her to finish. Karoline pressed forward. Morality isn't measured by how smooth your words sound. It's measured by whether you keep faith with the people who trusted you. I may not have the decades of power you talk about, but I have something they don't, honesty. Courage. And the refusal to sell out the people I represent. By now, the camera panned across faces in the crowd, eyes wide, jaws tight, tears in some eyes. Denzel shifted in his chair, the weight of her words cutting deeper than he expected. And Karoline delivered her final blow of the exchange, her voice clear, commanding, So no, Denzel, I'm not here to play a role. I'm not here to deliver scripted unity while ignoring the truth. I'm here to rip the mask off a system that has betrayed its people. And if that makes me the angry one in the room, so be it, because anger, when it's born of love and truth, is the spark that changes everything. The studio shook with applause, people rising to their feet, and in that moment, it wasn't just a debate. It was a turning point, and Karoline had seized it with fire. The applause still thundered through the studio when Denzel leaned back, taking a deliberate pause. He didn't try to shout over her. He didn't try to match her fire. Instead, he straightened his jacket, exhaled slowly, and waited for the audience to calm down, using silence like a weapon. When he finally spoke, his voice was smooth, calm, almost paternal. "Karoline," he said softly, "I admire your passion. But passion without wisdom is dangerous. Anger without direction is chaos. America doesn't just need fighters, it needs builders. And builders don't burn bridges, they raise them. You can win applause tonight, but in the end, anger fades. What lasts is vision. What endures is love." It was a masterstroke, the kind of delivery that made him not just an actor, but a sage in the room. The audience nodded, some even clapped softly, as if he had just placed himself above the brawl, offering perspective instead of blows. It was the trap, make Karoline look small, emotional, short-sighted, while he stood as the voice of timeless wisdom. Karoline knew it. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down, the eyes of millions watching to see if she could rise above it or crumble under the elegance of his counter. But she didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her expression firm, her tone sharpened like a blade. "You talk about vision, Denzel," she said, her voice cutting through the studio, "but what good is vision if you never open your eyes? What good is love if you never defend the people you claim to love? Builders don't raise bridges by ignoring the fires underneath them. Builders raise bridges because they're willing to get their hands dirty, to step into the chaos, to fight through the noise for the sake of something better. And if passion makes me dangerous, then maybe that's exactly what this country needs, someone dangerous enough to shake the system out of its lies." The crowd exploded again, this time louder than before. She didn't stop, her momentum was unstoppable now. "You say love endures. You're right. But love isn't gentle speeches. Love is sacrifice. Love is courage. Love is telling the truth even when people hate you for it. That's the love that built this country. That's the love that keeps people in the fight when everything in the system tells them to quit." Her words slammed against his calm delivery, and suddenly the contrast worked in her favor. His wisdom sounded rehearsed, her fire sounded real. The audience shifted, leaning toward her, clapping, shouting encouragement. Even the cameras couldn't look away, zooming in on her face as she spoke with conviction. And Karoline landed the final strike of the round, "So don't lecture me about bridges, Denzel. Because the people out there aren't looking for someone to build bridges to the same broken elite. They're looking for someone to burn down the barriers holding them back. And I'll do it, not because I'm angry, but because I love this country too much to watch it be destroyed." The studio went wild. Denzel's calm smile faltered just slightly. The duel wasn't over, but for the first time, it was clear, Karoline had matched his wisdom with raw, undeniable truth. The studio had become a battlefield, and Karoline could feel the weight of every camera pointed at her. Denzel leaned back in his chair, his smirk suggesting he believed he had landed the final blow with his last comment. But Karoline knew better, his confidence was the kind that cracked under pressure. She straightened her posture, locked eyes with him, and then with the audience, as if daring anyone to dismiss her words. "You think I'm just a politician?" she began, her voice steady yet rising with power. "Politics isn't about fame or applause, it's about the people who never get invited into rooms like this. The working mom who skips her own dinner so her kids can eat. The father working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. They don't need Hollywood applause, they need leaders with the courage to fight for them. The silence in the crowd was unlike anything before. Even the moderators froze, sensing this wasn't just rhetoric, it was a strike straight at the glossy image Denzel had tried to project. Her tone wasn't angry, but sharp, filled with conviction that left little room for rebuttal. Denzel attempted to respond, raising his hand slightly as though preparing to deliver a dramatic monologue, but Karoline didn't give him the chance. She leaned forward, her presence cutting through the artificial stage lights. "You've spent your life performing, memorizing lines written by others," she said. "But when it comes to defending freedom, when it comes to speaking for the voiceless, there's no script. There's just truth. And truth doesn't need rehearsing." The audience gasped, some even applauding before realizing how raw the moment was. Denzel's usual composure faltered. For the first time, he seemed unsure whether to keep playing the role of the witty critic or retreat into silence. Karoline's voice pressed on, undeterred. "I didn't come here for applause. I came here because this country is bleeding, and too many in power would rather stage a performance than face reality." Her words didn't just linger, they reverberated, bouncing through every corner of the studio. What began as an interview had become a trial, and Denzel wasn't ready for cross-examination. By now, the energy in the room had shifted entirely. The crowd was no longer leaning toward Denzel's charisma but hanging on to Karoline's every word. The moderators shuffled their papers nervously, trying to regain control of the program, but the dynamic had changed. Karoline stood tall, no longer seated, commanding the stage as though it were a courtroom where truth had taken the witness stand. "This isn't about Hollywood, politics, or headlines," she declared. "It's about whether we have the courage to stand up when it matters most. And I refuse to bow to mockery, whether it comes from a politician, a celebrity, or even a president. Because at the end of the day, the American people deserve more than a performance, they deserve the truth." The eruption of applause was unstoppable. Even critics in the crowd were forced to acknowledge the moment. Denzel, his earlier bravado stripped away, leaned back with a faint smile, not of victory, but of defeat disguised as respect. Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she had owned the stage, flipping the entire script live, before millions. "Tonight wasn't just about defending myself, it was about proving that truth doesn't bend to celebrity, politics, or scripted applause. When I walked onto this stage, I knew I would be mocked, dismissed, and underestimated. But I also knew something stronger: the American people are tired of being lied to, laughed at, and ignored. We live in a time when performance has replaced leadership, when sound bites are valued more than solutions, and when mocking someone has become easier than debating them. But that ends the moment we refuse to play along. I didn't stand here to win applause. I stood here because our country deserves voices that won't bow down to power, whether it wears a suit, holds office, or hides behind Hollywood lights. So let them laugh. Let them shout. At the end of the day, words meant to humiliate only reveal the weakness of those who speak them. I'm not leaving this stage defeated, I'm leaving it with a promise: to keep fighting for the truth, to keep exposing the games, and to keep reminding America that courage will always outshine performance. And if tonight proved anything, it's this: mockery fades, but truth echoes.